All right, here we have Bitcoin starting off with the most important piece of information, of which has been a rather important warning signal, all things considered, in the past week or so here, and that is going to be the global open interest represented on the Crown Chain application. Of course, you can get all of this data for free in the link in the description below. If you go down here to the hourly feed, which is available for premium, we can see it's actually a little bit lower than where we're at on the daily feed for right now, but the big piece of information here was that we are starting to see a pullback after, kind of hitting extremes, and that is to be expected. The question now, and the question that we're going to try to explore during this video, is going to be how severe should we expect this pullback, and where are sort of the major pain points. Anyways, for right now, what we should probably be aware of is that, anytime that we have seen in the past couple of years here, Bitcoin's open interest get above 14 billion, keeping in mind that open interest represents leveraged positions, it has led to, on average, or at least minimum on average, about 20% moves to the downside. Theoretically, you could see these moves also happen to the upside as well, but it has been the history that all these moves have happened to the downside. Anyways, I'll give you a few examples right here to kind of put this into context. The last time that we saw it kind of around those deeper 14 billion numbers was actually in April of last year when Bitcoin was at $65,000. Compare that where Bitcoin is, kind of in this last little rally up to about 48,000 bucks. Quite a big differential right there. And, a lot of people, hammering the leverage a little bit hard as usual. Anyways, to also put this in perspective, the last time we saw it around these levels, more recently, excuse my caffeine burp right there, was in November, late November, when Bitcoin was trading deep into the $50,000 territory. So with that in mind, if we do see an unraveling from this region, which I would not say is my main sort of ideas just yet, but if it were to happen, we are going to be looking at some pretty significant downside. So I do think that it's relevant to be aware of, as we've been saying for the past couple weeks here, since this really started getting some critical regions, but I don't think that's actionable just yet for the higher term timeframes. Now let's juxtapose that against the short term timeframes. Should also mention the leverage ratio. Again, we're kind of calling this out the past few days as well. Some of the highest levels that we've ever seen, in fact, although it did dump off a little bit there. So that is, I guess, a little bit of a consolation prize. But now let's go to the short term timeframes over here. So yesterday I didn't really say too much about the short term timeframes. Most of the focus was on the higher term timeframes, which we're going to get to soon enough. But on the short term timeframes, we did say, hey, any sort of an hourly closure below this region, it's just above 46,000 bucks, very likely initiates a move down to the bottom end of this blue box territory right here at about 44,500. We have gotten that move. Happened quite fast actually as well. It doesn't always have to happen that fast, but I would be looking for a bounce from this region actually on the short-term timeframes, regardless of kind of whether I'm bullish or bearish here. So let's put things into perspective. Bitcoin over the past I don't know how long has this been, about 2 weeks, over the past couple weeks since middle of March, has gone on, almost a $10,000 tear to the upside without any, major pullbacks. This is your first 8% or so pullback. Let me actually confirm that. Let's see, from top to bottom, about 8.25% pullback after basically a 40% or so move to the upside, or sorry, I'm way off on that one, about 30% almost. From the most recent low. And, is it relevant to be looking for a pullback from there? Is that like a death sentence in and of itself? No, it's not. But I want to be very specific with today's video in the sense that, hey, when you do incorporate the global open interest over here and realize that, there very likely is a major unraveling at some point, I do want to offer up a pain point for where I think that would very likely be, and in this case, it's actually quite cut and dry. In this case, I do think even a higher term time frame closure, not necessarily a daily, but like a 5-day closing below about $44,500, probably does start to initiate that. If I'm looking at a daily, theoretically, I could hold off until about $43,500 in this case, especially seeing as we do have the silver cross in the daily over here. I look at that as active, and pullbacks are kind of likely after you get across like that, but you do not want to see it close below, especially the 55, but even the 21 is kind of, makes it quite iffy, and it does start to look a lot more trappy at that point. And then we have to start to consider what would a potential 20% move from top to bottom look like here, and that would bring Bitcoin back down to the bottom side of this range that Bitcoin's been living in for the past 3 months, or actually, I guess, a little bit more than 3 months now. Somewhere down into the $38,000 to $37,000 region over time from there. Until that happens, though, I do think that it's reasonable to think that Bitcoin plays out a short-term pullback right here. Very, 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 very likely bounces on the short term, as we said right here. Then I look for momentum oscillators on this pane to kind of judge where I do look for potentially a low in this case. In this case, we do see 6 hours stochastic momentum is nosediving as long as Bitcoin's below 47.3. Obviously, that's going to change in the next closure, but for right now, coming down pretty damn heftily, as is the 4 hour. $46,000 can be the pain point right there. 3 hour is going to be showing about 45.5, and hourly is going to be showing up actually above 44,650. So what does this likely align with? Probably aligns with a little bit more short-term sideways, if I had to guess, something like this, and then very likely a bounce. Problem is that we have a weekend coming up, and anytime that I see a weekend bounce after a Friday sell-off, which to be fair, it's not, we haven't seen the end of Friday just yet, usually not the best sign, but I would not really consider that I would not really consider that Bitcoin's done anything of specific interest on the short-term timeframes, not for the love of God before getting above about 45.5, but let alone it's really like about $46,500, kind of that breakdown point that we saw back on over here. As long as Bitcoin's below there, short-term bounces are just corrective moves, and corrective moves within the context of this current trend would be implying actually more downside, or at least another try down around here. So I would be cognizant of that. Until then, I would give Bitcoin a chance, and if Bitcoin starts to trade back above and close even medium-term timeframes above about 46,500, I would say that is going to start to confirm this is your next major low. In this case, a higher low after a nice reversal, and Bitcoin probably does play at those upside targets. Here's the thing, though. I was looking for some pretty obvious signals coming into today. These signals that we've kind of been preparing for over the past week, given the monthly closure, they have not been confirmed with yesterday's sell-off right before close. The big one for me, or one of the big ones for me, was the monthly, was monthly hidden bullish evidence right here. It had a potential to confirm it yesterday. Bitcoin needed to close above about at minimum $46,500, preferably above 47. Obviously, that didn't happen, and so there's no hidden bullish evidence confirmed. So that is it's technically not like completely, it's not that it's fully invalidated. It was never validated, but that is no longer a point in favor of the Boo laws for continuation into April. On top of that, what also is rather concerning here is on the fundamental chart, of which I want to reference the accumulation distribution indicator. We did actually get a negative slope coming into this new month of April, after having our first positive slope in a long time for the month of March. So I do look at this as obviously not in the Boo law's favor, but it's a long month to go, and you actually can't really judge these until literally the last day of the month, because there is a lot that goes into it. But in this case right here, I keep on pulling it out and trying to see if there's anything that is of interest, historically speaking, towards this current region right here. I do think the only thing that kind of fits that bill is actually this area from November 2016, and September 2016, that is, where we did see a slope change in the very shallow regions of this. Now, that did eventually lead upwards and onwards on price action right here, kind of correlated towards the same area. But it did speak towards, a multi-month correction. So is that potentially what we're looking at right here? Well, if this month actually does close with a downward slope, no, very unlikely. We probably do see it correct all the way down to at least the red zone. But for right now, another thing that could have made calling for more upside into April a lot more easy, but that alongside our other signal, is just not going to be there. And then the last point, the very, very big last point, Elsa's like, she's got someone on her phone over there. The last very, very big point over here, or actually two last very big points, is the 5-day. So remember, the 5-day BBWP was running a lot of the analysis for projected targets to come, likely in the next 40-ish days, let's say, referencing this chart right here. This one, if you do remember it. The problem with the last 5-day closure, which we did have last night alongside the monthly and quarterly, is that it no longer has a positive slope. So we're not seeing expansion just yet. Obviously, that can change on the next 5-day closure, but until we get an open and close on a positive slope above the moving average, I can't really call that just yet. So this signal is actually still baking, and to look at the historical results from this, which on average produces a 45% gain or loss from that expansion point, is still going to be relevant to either think about the upside or the downside. And to take this even one last step further, if seeing as we do have a Friday closure today, and if this does happen, I'm probably going to start to lean a lot more on the bear side, or at least, a lot more sooner rather than later in this case, would be if the weekly does confirm hidden bearish evidence, which actually, Actually, as of right now, we can't do on CME. So hey, there you go. There's a little bit of a consolation prize. I'm curious if it's relevant on spot. It is relevant on spot, but in order to confirm this as hidden bearish evidence, we need to confirm a weekly lower high right here. And the only way to do that as of right now would be close this week anywhere below, basically anywhere below like $47,000, and then next week trade below the low of this week, which so far is about $44,000. Until that happens, that signal is obviously not activated, but does deserve a bit of what's it called, acknowledgement there. Anyways, until then, I do think that, at least for myself, I'm probably going to be waiting for the higher term timeframes to kind of resolve in this case. And in the meantime, just realistically doing what I only do, which is trade the short term timeframes. so fair enough in this case. Going back again here, short term timeframes kind of wrapping it up. A little bit of sideways and probably a bounce into the weekend. I do think that 45.4 to 45.5 is rather likely. Other than that, I just look at it as a range play, and I would not call this your next higher low with continuation targets higher, up into the $50,000 plus region until we do see at least a medium term time frame closure and preferably a higher term time frame closure of about 46.5 or so. Until then, any bounce is just another lower high, but and I would not, and by the same token to the downside, I would not confirm major major downside until at least we're getting like a high term time frame closure below about 44.5 or a daily below about 43.5 in this case. If one of those two things happens, well, very likely looking at a move back down to the mid to upper $30,000 territory in the following weeks. Until then, I still look at this as probably, let's give it a chance first is kind of what I'd say here. I don't think I need to say anything more than that. Anyways, hopefully that was helpful. And there you go for Bitcoin, sirs and zers.